Daylight in the high pass looked almost clean enough to forgive. The sky was a hard, polished blue, the snow a blinding sheet broken only by rock and armored steel crawling along a scraped-out road. On a map, the shallow valley was just another contour line. From ground level, it was a bowl, wide enough to move vehicles, narrow enough to trap them. The trap had just sprung. Tracer fire slashed through the cold air in crooked red lines, each one a fast, bright promise of death. They stitched across the valley from both ridges at once, snapping over the heads of soldiers hugging the tracks of their vehicles, punching into the soft sides of snowbanks that weren't nearly high enough to hide behind. "Contact left, right, both ridges," someone yelled, voice cracking over the chaos. Two armored personnel carriers burned in the snow, black smoke dragging itself into the thin air and bending under the wind. The lead vehicle had taken an RPG hit high and right, the turret now a twisted crown of steel. Further back, the last truck in the column lay sideways, wheels still spinning, its rear half shredded by a buried charge that had blown it off the road and into the drift. They were inside a crossfire, and there was nowhere to go. Sergeant Mendez, call sign actual for the lead squad, shoved his shoulder tighter into the side of a smoking vehicle and mashed the transmit key on his radio. "Thunder 2-1, troops in contact. Multiple firing positions, both ridges at least." His voice cut out under a burst of nearby machine gun fire and the dry, sharp whine of rounds ricocheting off armor. Snow puffed into the air inches from his boot. He keyed the mic again. "Thunder 6, this is 2-1. Be advised, we're in a kill box requesting." Static. Not the usual interference, not the random hiss of distance and weather. This static pulsed, like someone dragging a metal rake across a fence, rhythmic and deliberate. Mendez let go of the key, tried another net. "Firebird, this is Thunder 2-1, troops in contact, requesting immediate." The same metallic roar crashed into his ear, making him flinch. He ripped the handset away, grimaced, then slammed it back into place. "Radios are screwed," he shouted over his shoulder. "Jammed or just." A spray of rounds tore into the snow between him and the next vehicle, close enough that he felt the heat of one pass his cheek. He flattened, face mashed into the ice, and saw a shape crawling 10 meters away. Patterson. The private's right leg dragged behind him in an ugly smear of red that stood out against the white like paint. One hand clutched at his thigh, the other clawed at the snow as he tried to reach the low line of cover offered by the nearest wheel. "Stay down," Mendez yelled, knowing it was useless. If Patterson stayed where he was, he'd die in the open. If he moved, he might die faster. Round began to walk toward the wounded man, neat little bursts in the snow, adjusting again. Someone up on the ridge had him measured. Mendez pushed up onto one knee, brought his rifle to his shoulder, and tried to trace the incoming fire back to an origin point. All he could see was glare, rock, and the faint shadow of a machine gun nest cut into the slope halfway up the left ridge. Dark figures flickered there, little more than silhouettes through the heat ripples. Before he could line up, the machine gun spoke again. Patterson's body jolted as the snow around him exploded. And then, suddenly, something else cut through the valley. A single shot. Not automatic, not panicked. One flat crack, sharper than the rest, riding over the echo of the machine gun as if it didn't care who else was talking. Up on the left ridge, the enemy gunner's helmet snapped back. For a heartbeat, he remained upright. Then he folded sideways, sliding down onto the blood-stained snow. The belt of ammunition stopped moving. The valley seemed to inhale. Mendez blinked. He hadn't fired. No one near him had line of sight that clean. He rolled to cover, pressed his back to the track, and looked up at the ridge again. The machine gun position was still there. Sandbags, rock lip, a scatter of brass. Now missing the man who'd been tearing them apart. "What the hell?" he muttered. Another crack, just as precise, from somewhere far beyond the edges of what his ears could neatly place. On the right ridge this time, a figure who'd been lying prone behind an optic jerked once and went still. The long rifle in front of them slipped from nerveless fingers and slid down a few inches, its barrel catching in a patch of ice. "Sniper," someone shouted, but the word came with confusion instead of fear. Ours or theirs? Mendez didn't know. He grabbed his radio again, as if the miracles might have fixed it. Any station this net? Identify shooter on high ground. Over. The only answer was that cold, mechanical grinding static, relentless and calm amid the human chaos. The jammer hadn't gone anywhere. All around him, the soundscape had split in two. Down in the valley, it was all panic and volume. Shouted commands, explosive thumps, metal screaming as armor caught fresh hits. Up somewhere in the mountains, there was the steady, measured heartbeat of a single rifle, each round placed like a signature. One shot, a beat of silence. Another. Patterson, still dragging himself with his one good leg, had just enough time to look up and see the enemy marksman who'd been walking rounds onto him suddenly slump forward, crimson blooming across their chest. The next burst went wild, chewing harmlessly into a distant snowbank. Patterson made it to the wheel. Mendez watched him disappear behind the vehicle's bulk, then scanned the ridgelines again. Whoever was doing this, whoever had the angle, was invisible. No glint of glass, no silhouette against the sky. He wasn't the only one looking. Heads lifted above partial cover all along the line. Soldiers risking a peek in the middle of the crossfire, searching for the ghost that was killing for them. "Anybody know about Overwatch?" someone yelled. "We got high-angle support on tasking." "Nobody told us," another voice shot back. "We can't raise anyone." Mendez looked down at the radio, then at the blazing vehicles, then back up to the distant slopes that encircled them. The brief hope that had flared when the machine gun fell silent now warred with reality. They were still trapped, still encircled, still deaf, and yet, somehow, not entirely alone. The rifle spoke again. Another enemy position went quiet, as if a switch had been thrown. This time it was on the far right, an RPG team that had been dancing from rock to rock, looking for a clean shot at the last intact carrier. One moment the grenadier was shouldering his launcher. The next he was crumpled over it, the round falling harmlessly into the slush. Up on a ridge, no one had briefed. Someone was playing God with their fate. The narrator's voice, calmer than anyone on the ground, detached yet close, cuts in as if stepping through the gunfire. They were never meant to have Overwatch today. On paper, the route was low threat. On paper, this was a simple retrieval. On paper, they had all the advantages. On paper, they had her. Another measured crack. Another threat removed with surgical indifference. 24 hours ago, the voice continues, they'd thrown her out of the unit. The story snaps, hard, to a different image. Not burning wrecks and tracer fire, but fluorescent light over an armory counter. A woman stands there in cold weather gear, hood down, cheeks still red from the frost outside. Her expression is unreadable, jaw clenched so tight you can see the muscles in her neck. On the counter between her and the clerk lies a long rifle case. Her hands rest on it for one extra second. 5 fingers splayed over the worn plastic, thumb brushing the scuffed latch, as if memorizing the feel. "Sign here, Sergeant Holt," the clerk says. She does. Behind her, a heavy metal door closes, cutting off the sight of snow and sky, sealing her in fluorescent hum and paperwork. Out in the valley, the unit that signed her off their roster huddles behind burning steel, eyes wide, ears ringing, lives balanced on the metronome rhythm of shots fired by ghosts in the mountains they no longer claim as theirs. That morning, the snow at the forward operating site had been undisturbed, an unbroken sheet spilled across the mountains under a pale blue sky. Engines idled in the motor pool, sending low, steady vibrations through the steel around them, but the day itself had felt almost quiet, waiting, not yet decided. Sergeant Kara Holt stood in front of the map wall with her gloves tucked in her belt and her sleeves pushed up, tracing a line across the laminated surface with the back of a pen. The line represented the route, from their current position along the valley road, through the pass, up to the small hilltop sensor station whose icon blinked in faint red. Next to it sat the symbol for a hardened equipment cache. Encrypted drives, specialized electronics, all the things higher headquarters lost sleep over if they had to leave them behind. "You're scowling at my map again," Lieutenant Rios said from behind her. He had a mug of coffee cupped in both hands, steam curling into the cold air of the makeshift command shack. I'm scowling at the terrain, Kara replied without turning. Her voice was soft, level, the kind you had to lean in to hear in a noisy range. Your map is innocent. That's not what the map said last time, Rios said. What's bothering you? She tapped the pass with the pen. This cut. Here. Rios stepped closer, frowning at the clutter of contour lines. On the satellite printout pinned next to the map, the area looked like a simple notch through the ridge, snowfield, rock outcrops, a sinuous road carved by engineers. Looks like a dozen other cuts we've driven these last 2 months, he said. It doesn't match the last imagery, Kara said. She reached up to the stack of photos, clipped to the board, and flipped to an older image, then another. The angle was slightly different, the sun casting longer shadows, but the slopes were otherwise unchanged. Here, she said, pointing. 3 weeks ago. That ridge face is clean. No scars, no vertical breaks. Rios narrowed his eyes, following her fingertip. And now look. She tapped the new image. 2 fresh avalanche scars. Same aspect, different depths. But we haven't had that much snow in the interval. Could have been wind loading, Rios said, but there wasn't much conviction behind it. She shook her head once. Maybe, but look at the debris fans. They're too tight, controlled, and the runouts stop short of the road. And that means... It means somebody knows how to shape snow, she said quietly. You cut the slope under the right layer, you can trigger just enough movement to carve a chute, not enough to bury the road. You get cover channels, blinds, small caves in the pack. Rios sipped his coffee, glanced over at the intel table where Captain Sawyer, lean, sharp, uniform immaculate, was tapping at a laptop, feeds and overlays reflecting in his glasses. Have you talked to Sawyer? Rios asked. Kara's jaw ticked. I will. She set the pen down and walked over, boots thudding softly on plywood. Outside, a vehicle revved, then settled. The air smelled like diesel and melted snow. Sir, she said, stopping by the intel table. About the pass. Sawyer didn't look up immediately. If this is about your weather worries again, Sergeant, I've already accounted for. It's not the weather, she said. It's the scars. 2 new avalanche channels, no corresponding storm. Satellite resolution shows odd track patterns on the north ridge above them, too. Now, he did look up. Track patterns? She flipped the image around, pointed. Here, parallel lines, intermittent. About a meter apart. Could be shepherd paths, could be pack animals. But they're too straight and too regular. And they terminate in shadow zones. That's where I'd put teams if I wanted to own the high ground without showing up on a casual scan. Sawyer let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Sergeant, the route is low threat. We've had 3 other convoys through that corridor in the last month with 0 contact. The local group is busy harassing the river road. This is in our rear area. Rear areas are where you test people, Kara said. Sir, do you remember the Jawal Valley ambush last year? Sawyer's eyes cooled. Of course. They did the same thing, she said. Picked a quiet valley, worked out how fast we could respond, tried to grab gear and prisoners for the camera. They failed because we had a bird in the air by accident. This time we don't. This time, Sawyer said, we have updated SIGINT that shows no organized enemy elements within 30 kilometers of that pass. I'm not going to scrub a required retrieval op because one sniper thinks the snow looks funny. Rios cleared his throat. She's not just one sniper. She was there in Jawal. She saw the layout up close. Sawyer's gaze slid to Kara. She was also recently written up for refusing to follow a direct fire order. There it was. The thing everyone knew but didn't say out loud unless they wanted the temperature in the room to drop. Kara didn't flinch. I refused to fire on a compound that had civilians in it, she said. We didn't know they were there when the order was given. The point is that you refused, Sawyer said. Hire looked at that, they looked at your counseling statements, and they made a call. You're off the rotation for this one. Rios opened his mouth, but Sawyer held up a hand. Look, I'm not saying you aren't good at what you do, Sergeant, the intel officer went on. You are. Your file reads like a recruitment poster until that incident. But we can't have someone on the mission roster who thinks they know better than command every time their gut twitches. My gut doesn't twitch, sir, Karras said softly. It reads terrain, patterns, capabilities. And it's telling me that pass is wrong. Duly noted, Sawyer said. Noted, filed, and overruled. He slid a folder across the table. Orders came down this morning. You're to turn your long rifle at the armory and ride back with the next logistics convoy. You're attached to rear security until further notice. The words landed like dull blows. Kara didn't argue. She didn't plead. She just nodded once, the movement barely visible. Yes, sir, she said. She walked out of the shack into the cold, harder light. For a moment she stood there, letting the air strip the warmth from her face. The armory smelled like oil and old metal. The clerk inside, Corporal Hahn, gave her a quick, sympathetic glance as she laid the long, scuffed case on the counter. Tough break, he said. She didn't answer. Her fingers brushed the latch, hesitated, then popped it. The case opened with a familiar click, revealing the rifle that had been part of her for years. Cold weather stock, worn grip, scratches in the finish that each had a memory attached. Tucked into the foam next to it was a small photograph. She lifted it out with 2 fingers. A younger soldier smiled up at her from the worn paper, uniform collar slightly crooked, mountain range blurred in the background. Same eyes as hers, same stubborn line to the mouth. No longer here. Kara let the memory rush in for a second. The radio call that had broken in half, the cliff face that had given way under bad guidance, the way command had called it acceptable risk afterward. She slid the photograph back into its place in the case, then put her hand flat on the rifle's stock one last time. Sign here, Sergeant Holt, Hans said. She did. When she turned away, her shoulders squared, face smooth. On her way out, she passed the motor pool. Vehicles lined up like beasts at a starting gate, exhaust steaming in the cold. She stopped at the edge of the concrete, eyes tracking from machine to machine, then up beyond them. The ridges loomed over everything, white and shadow and jagged rock. She traced them from left to right, building a 3-dimensional model in her head. Slope, aspect, potential firing positions, possible routes. The pass looked smaller from here, just a notch in the distance. She stared long enough that one of her squad mates, Davis, came up behind her and nudged her lightly with an elbow. You're going to burn a hole through those mountains, he said. Someone should, she replied. He looked at her for a second, then around to make sure no one else was close. From inside his jacket, he pulled a small pouch and pressed it into her hand. What's this? She asked. Spare optic, he said. From my kit. And 3 mags. In case they come to their senses and throw you on a bird at the last second. She frowned, starting to pass it back. I can't. Yeah, you can, he said. Look, I don't care what the paperwork says. If that route makes your skin crawl, that's enough for me. Humor me. The pouch felt heavier than its contents. She slipped it into her own jacket, the metal cold against her ribs. Thanks, she said. Just promise me one thing, Davis said, half joking, half deadly serious. If they're wrong and you're right, don't let them forget it. She didn't answer. Her gaze had drifted back to the ridgeline, memorizing every contour, every shadow. Hours later, when the convoy rolled out, she watched it go from the same spot. Engines growled, treads bit into snow, and the line of vehicles crept toward the notch in the distance like a column of black ants crossing a white sheet. On the manifest, she was done with them. In her mind, she was still on that road, walking every inch in advance, eyes always up, waiting for the first wrong sound. By midday, the sky had sharpened, the weak morning haze burned away. Sunlight hit the snow so hard it bounced back in spears of white, forcing everyone to squint behind dark lenses. Convoy, this is lead. Thermal scan is clean. The driver of the first vehicle reported, voice crackling over the internal net. No heat blooms on either ridge. Optics look good too. Just rock and snow. Copy, lead, came a reply from the platoon leader in the middle truck. Stay on route. Watch that overhang at kilometer marker 12. They rolled on, engines rumbling, treads squeaking faintly over the packed snow. From inside, the soldiers felt more isolated than protected, the world reduced to whatever sliver of landscape they could see through reinforced glass and firing ports. Along the road, The pass drew closer, its sides rising like slow-motion waves on either flank. The mountains pressed inward, funneling them into the corridor Kara had stood staring at from the safety of the forward sight. In the back of one vehicle, Patterson sat with his helmet tilted against the steel, eyes closed, letting the vibration lull him halfway towards sleep. The rhythm was almost soothing. He felt the change in texture a half-second before anyone saw it, the difference between treads on compacted snow and something looser, less trustworthy. "What was that?" he said, blinking, pushing himself upright. No one answered before the world tore open. The explosion came from under the second vehicle in line. One moment, it was just another armored box rolling forward. The next, it was an expanding ball of smoke and steel fragments, the sound hitting everyone else as a physical blow. The blast punched up through the belly, lifting the entire 20-ton behemoth off the ground, shoving it sideways and forward. Snow and dirt erupted, smothering the road in a spray of white and black. "IED! IED!" someone screamed over the net. Patterson's vehicle slammed on its brakes. He was thrown against the harness, ribs protesting, as the driver tried not to rear-end the wreck in front of them. Before anyone could process that first hit, the second charge went off. This one was behind the tail vehicle, timed perfectly, buried under the snow where no one had seen it in the pre-mission checks. It rolled the last truck like a toy, flipping it onto its side and slamming it into the inner wall of the pass. The column was now pinned between two burning hulks, boxed in front and rear. "Contact! Contact!" came the overlapping yells, some over radio, some just screamed into the confines of armored hulls. "All stations." The rest of the call dissolved as the ridges lit up. Machine guns opened from the left first, long, sustained bursts that raked the road and the vehicles clustered along it. The rounds tore into the snow, threw up geysers, clanged off armor with a sound like hammers on sheet metal. On the right, designated marksmen picked specific targets. Anyone who'd stepped out of a vehicle, any head that popped up to look. Their shots were slower, meaner, each one chased by a puff of snow and a spray of stone. An RPG streaked down from the upper slopes, smoke trail carving a line across the blue. It smashed into the turret of the third vehicle, sending shrapnel fanning out. Inside, men shouted and swore, some of their voices turning high and thin. Mendez, in the fourth vehicle, tried to follow protocol even as his gut screamed at him. "Contact right, contact left, possible multiple squads with support weapons." He called, "King is Mike, Thunder 6, this is 2-1, Static drowned him out. It wasn't chaos. It was deliberate, layered interference, a harsh mechanical roar that made his teeth hurt. He switched channels. Same thing. Another. No luck. Jammer. He snapped to the men around him. "They've got a jammer up there somewhere." Outside, soldiers bailed out of the vehicles, using whatever cover they could find. Wheels, engine blocks, the shallow ditch at the road's edge. The problem was that the ditch was shallow because the valley was. There was nowhere to dig in, nowhere to drop below the sight lines of the guns above. It took Rios less than 30 seconds to recognize the shape of what they were in. "Kill box," he shouted, scrambling to the rear hatch of his vehicle, hauling a wounded private in with one arm. "We're in a kill box. High ground both sides, channelized movement, no egress. Get smoke out, get guns up, find me that jammer." Smoke grenades popped and hissed, throwing thin gray veils into the wind. They provided some concealment, but the high angle of fire from the ridges meant nothing stayed hidden for long. Mortar rounds began to fall, landing short at first, then long. The first impact sent a curtain of snow and dirt into the air 30 meters ahead of the convoy. The second landed 50 meters behind. Bracketing, Rios muttered, "They're walking it in." Each round landed closer, the pattern tightening like a noose. Shrapnel pinged off armor, shredded the few exposed canvas sections, tore through the unfortunate souls who happened to be in the wrong place. Platoon Sergeant Cole was one of those. He'd been halfway between vehicles when the first mortar adjusted into the sweet spot. The blast knocked him sideways, shrapnel slicing across his side. He went down hard, blood already soaking through his winter layers. "Cole's hit," someone yelled. "I need a medic." "Medic? Medics tried to move, but every attempt to cross the open ground was met with a storm of fire from above. They crawled instead, dragging kits behind them, using patches of smoke as short-lived walls. Inside the remaining operational vehicles, gunners fired back, turret weapons hammering at any muzzle flash they could see, but firing up at steep angle from the low center of the valley, with limited depression and traverse. They were half blind, half effective. "Give me air," Rio shouted, grabbing his radio man's handset and jamming it to his ear. "Any station this net. This is Thunder 6. We are..." The same hateful, pulsing interference chewed his words into uselessness. He could hear himself screaming into the handset, but on the other end, no one would hear anything but noise. Back at the forward operating site, one of the backup radios, set to monitor convoy traffic, picked up fragments of their panic. Kara, who'd been in the corner of the operations tent, writing a routine report she didn't care about, froze. "Ender 6, TAR, contact Multup." A roar of static swallowed the rest. It was the same pattern over and over, cycling, grinding. She knew that sound. While Sawyer and Rios argued in the aftermath of Jawal, while command patted itself on the back for a robust response, Kara had sat in the comms tent, listening to hours of recorded interference. The enemy then had used a homemade jammer, sloppy but effective enough to cut off their first calls. She'd memorized the rhythm of it, the way it spiked in certain bands. This was cleaner, but it sang the same song. Her hand tightened on the edge of the table. She stepped closer to the radio set, ignoring the glance the comms specialist gave her. "Can you punch through that?" she asked. He shook his head. "Whatever it is, it's close to them and powerful. It's chewing up everything." Another broken call squeaked through, a voice on the edge of panic. "We're in a trap. Repeat, we're..." "Gone again." Kara lifted her eyes to the map on the wall. The little icon marking the convoy was deep inside the pass now. She looked beyond the map, in her mind, to the satellite photos she'd studied. The new avalanche scars, the tracks, the blind spots. They hadn't been mistakes in the snow. They'd been approach routes, firing pockets, concealed positions. All now awake and firing. The forward sight around her seemed suddenly too quiet. Engines idled. People moved briskly between tents. No one yelled yet. No one bled. She could feel the pressure building under that calm. A storm in the wires, waiting to break. And the question, the one she'd asked in the briefing and been patted on the head for, came back with a new edge. If they're so sure the valley's quiet, why does it look like someone carved it into a cage? Kara stood outside the ops tent, binoculars pressed to her face, elbows braced against the low sandbag wall to keep her hands steady. From here, the pass was a knife cut in the distant ridge, a darker notch against the white. She couldn't see the road itself, not at this distance, but she could see the smoke. Thin black threads were curling up into the blue, too straight to be weather, too sudden to be anything but burning steel. The radio behind her crackled with half-formed words, screams chopped into syllables by the jammer's pulse. "Thunder 6, this is..." "Ortar's left." "Can't see, can't." Then only the grinding, metallic roar, circling through the same bands, a ghost engine spinning against their efforts. She lowered the binoculars, took a breath so cold it burned her throat, and turned back into the tent. "Sir," she said. Sawyer looked up from the laptop, irritation already loaded in his eyes. "If this is more about the..." "They're in the pass," she cut in. "They're in it, and they're under contact from both ridges. Jamming is local and strong. Mortars are bracketing. They're not harassing us. They're trying to box them in and keep us blind while they work." "Thank you, Sergeant," he said tightly. "We are aware they are in contact." "You don't understand," Kara said. "This is Jawal all over again, but cleaner. They shaped the snow on those slopes to hide approach routes. They knew we'd call this low threat. They watched our pattern. They want something specific." "And what would that be?" Sawyer asked. "Our men, our vehicles, our sensor package," she said. "If they can grab the drives or destroy them on camera, they get both our data and a propaganda clip that'll be playing in every sympathetic village by next week. Look how we make them bleed in their own safe valleys." Sawyer hesitated. The thought had crossed his own mind, but admitting it would mean admitting she'd been right from the start. Either way, the immediate facts didn't change. Even if that's true, what do you suggest we do? He said. We have QRF spinning up, but it'll take time to get there. Air is on standby, but we need coordinates, and they can't punch through the jamming. We can't just start dropping steel blindly in those mountains. I'm not asking you to, Karis said. I'm asking you to let me go. Rios, who'd been leaning over a radio console, turned. Go where? To the ridgeline above the pass, she said. There's an old trail on the north face. It's not used by vehicles, but it'll put me behind the high positions. If I can get eyes on their key assets, I can start cutting away at them. And if I can locate the jammer, I can punch a hole in their curtain so air and artillery can see. Sawyer stared at her, as if she'd suggested she grow wings. You're not on the mission roster anymore, he said. You don't have a weapon assigned. You don't have. I can fix that, she said. She already had, in part. The weight of the pouch against her ribs reminded her. Making the decision felt less like a leap than like stepping into a footprint she'd been walking toward all morning. The future had been narrowing itself down to this for hours. Now, there was only one path left. If we wait for the QRF to drive in there, she said quietly, they're going to hit the same kill box, just later and with more vehicles. If air goes in blind and the jammer's still up, they're flying into a half-seen net. You need someone on the high ground, now, who knows what they're looking at. And that someone is you, Sawyer said, disbelief shading into anger. Because of your gut. Because I've been living inside that terrain since you first put it on the wall, she replied. Because I know what the snow is hiding. Because I'm still the best shot you have within 100 kilometers, whether I'm on your roster or not. Rios, eyes on the radio readouts, spoke without looking up. Sir, we're losing them. If she's wrong, we've lost one more person. If she's right, and we keep her here, he let the rest hang. Sawyer's jaw worked. For a moment, the weight of responsibility sat heavy enough to crack his certainty. He saw again the satellite images she put in front of him, the scars on the slopes. You know this is off the books, he said. If you go and something happens. Something is already happening, Karis said. We're just not there for it. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just looked away, back at his screen, which was a kind of permission. Kara took it. In the armory, she moved like she had a right to be there. Han looked up, startled. I thought you turned that in, he said. I did, she said. I need something else. All the good rifles were checked out, their racks empty. She went to the training section instead, a row of older models used for qualification. She picked one up, cycling the bolt, checking the bore, the trigger, the balance. It wasn't a rifle, but it was honest steel and glass. It would do. From the pouch Davis had given her, she pulled the compact optic, mounted it, and tightened it with deft, practiced movements. It wasn't perfectly zeroed, but she'd walked in worse. Ammunition was harder. She couldn't strip too many boxes without someone noticing, so she took 3 magazines from the training bin and 2 more from a half-empty case, pocketing loose rounds. Are you supposed to be doing this? Han asked quietly. No, she said, but if anyone asks, I'm taking them to the range. He watched her for a second, then nodded once. Be careful, Holt. Outside, she added a coil of rope, an old climbing harness, and a handful of hand warmers to her pack. None of it was signed out. None of it officially existed. The Go Trail she'd memorized from the old maps started behind the wire, a faint line where rock met snow. She stepped onto it and felt the world narrow down. The climb was steep from the first turn. The wind met her halfway, fingers of cold reaching down the slope. Powder whipped across her boots in small flurries, erasing her tracks almost as soon as she made them. Down valley, the distant thump of explosions drifted up in irregular waves. Sometimes she could hear the sharper chatter of guns. Sometimes there was only the wind. Every step she took carried her further away from the warmth of diesel engines and tent heaters, from the thin safety of rules and rosters. It carried her closer to the place where those rules had failed before. About 100 meters up, the trail skirted a rock face slick with ice. She anchored a piton, clipped in, and edged along, boots sliding on packed snow. A sudden collapse, a chunk of crust giving way, sent her left leg dropping into empty space. For a moment she hung sideways, one boot flailing, fingernails scraping rock. Her ice axe punched in by reflex. The point bit held. She dangled above a sheer drop, the pack dragging at her shoulders, the rifle slamming against her hip. The impact threw the rifle against the rock. She heard, more than saw, the brittle crack of plastic and metal. When she hauled herself back onto the ledge and checked, one of the adjustment turrets on the optic was snapped, its markings scarred. She twisted it. It spun freely, no longer connected to anything that mattered. "Okay," she muttered. "No dialing. Holdovers, then." Kentucky windage and instinct. Not her favorite way to work at range, but not impossible. Hanging there, breath coming hard, she wasn't in this mountain anymore for a second. She was back on another cliff, rope humming under too much weight, her siblings' laughter in her radio turning into a cut-off scream as the rock gave way. No air support that day. No overwatch. No one on the high ground. They'd called it unavoidable afterward. Terrain risk. Fog of war. There were names for it, all of them designed to let other people sleep. Kara closed her eyes, sucking cold air into her lungs, then opened them again. The memory didn't recede. It sharpened. It aligned itself behind her current anger like rounds in a magazine. One ledge at a time, she told herself. One move at a time. She cleared the broken section, hauled herself on a firmer ground, and continued to climb. Higher up, the wind grew teeth. It bit at any exposed skin, turned sweat into ice. Her thighs burned, her lungs hurt, her fingers ached where they gripped rock and rope. Finally, the pitch eased. The slope flattened into a narrow outcropping of rock, no more than a few meters wide, jutting out over a sheer drop. She crawled onto it on hands and knees, pack scraping. When she finally dared to look down, the entire pass unfurled beneath her. From this angle, the valley wasn't an abstract shape on a map anymore. It was a bowl of white and steel and fire. She saw the burning vehicles, the crawling figures, the flashes of muzzle fire from both ridges. And she saw something else, the dark mouths of snow caves cut into the slopes, exactly where she predicted they'd be. Enemy teams crouched in them like ticks in fur. She'd stood in the ops tent tracing contours and imagining this view. Now she had it. The impossible angle wasn't impossible after all. It just demanded that you leave the script behind. Kara lay prone on the narrow ledge, snow pressing cold against her chest through her jacket. The rifle was cradled in her hands, the stock snug against her shoulder, the optics cracked turret a small, ugly reminder that this was far from ideal. She dug the rifle's bipod into a shallow groove in the rock and built a rest under the stock with her pack, stuffing a folded jacket under it until it stopped wobbling. A jagged piece of ice served as a front brace, its edge biting into the handguard. Her breath fogged in front of her, drifting sideways in the wind. She exhaled, watched the vapor to judge the gusts. Through the scope, the world below snapped into a flat, compressed picture. She moved slowly, scanning left to right. Priorities first. The sniper. She found him on the far ridge, a dark shape tucked under a rock lip, rifle extended, muzzle just barely past the shadow, firing downward into the valley whenever a figure moved. He'd chosen a good hide. From anywhere else, he would have been almost invisible. From here, his silhouette cut cleanly against the snow. Kara checked the distance by feel, the mill markings in her optic the size of his head, the known width of a human shoulder, all translated in her mind into an approximate range. 800 meters, give or take. Normally, she'd dial the elevation turret. Now, with it ruined, she had to think in holds instead. She brought the crosshairs up above his head, finding the right imaginary notch in the sky. Wind from left to right, moderate gusting. She pushed her aim a little into the wind. Down below, something blew up. The shock wave shook the air a moment later. She let it roll through her body and pass. The sniper fired again, muzzle flash a small, bright flare in her sight. She rode the trace back, steadied, exhaled halfway, and pressed the trigger. Her rifle cracked, the sound sharp in the thin air. Through the scope, she saw his head jerk, a dark splash blooming against the rock behind him. his body folded oddly, like a tent collapsing. The rifle slid out from under his hands, barrel scraping on stone, then hung at an angle. "One," she murmured. She shifted her focus. The main belt-fed machine gun, tearing into the center of the convoy, was on the nearer ridge, its muzzle chewing through the snow in long bursts. Each time it fired, she could see soldiers in the valley flinch, duck, or fall. She tracked to it, counted the crew. Gunner, assistant, ammo feeder. 3 bodies, 3 brains. Kill the gunner first, then anyone dumb enough to sit in his seat. The distance was shorter here, 500 meters. She aimed just high enough, accounted for wind, and timed her shot between bursts to avoid the barrel's climb. Crack! The gunner's helmet snapped sideways, a chunk of it sailing off like a kick can. His body slumped forward over the weapon, pinning the trigger for a brief, wild spray before it went dead. The assistant grabbed at him, confusion written in his posture. Kara had a round already halfway to him by then. He pitched backward, arms flung wide. Down in the valley, the sudden silence from that direction felt like someone had opened a window in a burning room. Soldiers used the moment instinctively. Mendez yelled for everyone near him to move. 2 troopers grabbed Sergeant Cole under the arms, dragging his bleeding body behind a better section of hull. Others shifted positions, setting up a light machine gun to pour fire up toward another nest. Kara kept scanning. She listened to the pattern of the static in her earbud, the faint bleed from the radio she'd set to minimum volume before climbing. Beneath the interference, she heard a snatch of voice. 6, if you can't hear, contact both. The jammer was still up, chewing their calls into pieces. She dragged the scope further back along the enemy ridgeline, looking for something that didn't fit the natural terrain, straight lines, antenna shapes, the unnatural patchiness of camouflage netting. There, on a reverse slope behind the main line, partially hidden by a snow overhang and a cluster of rocks, someone had erected a small forest of antenna masts. Thin verticals with crossbars, a few dish shapes, cables snaking into a low shelter under the net. 3 figures moved inside the shelter, huddled around equipment cases. She couldn't see all of them clearly, but she didn't need to. The gear mattered more than the operators. She took a second to picture the ballistics. This shot was longer, angled, with variable wind between her and the target. Her scope's adjustments were limited to what the broken turret would allow, which was essentially nothing. She shifted to using the reticle's lower markings, mapping drop onto them from memory. Years of range cards and practice whispered in her bones. First round, she knew, might be a feeler. She chose the center figure, aimed just above their head, and fired. The shot's echo faded. Through the optic, she saw a puff of snow kick up short, a meter in front of the shelter's lip. Too low. The operators flinched but didn't bolt. They were under concealment. They thought they were safe. She adjusted, mentally, elevated a fraction more along the reticle. Second shot. This time, the center figure arched backward, one hand flying to their chest. They toppled, knocking over a case, cables spilling. Another operator lunged to catch them, shouting. The static in her ear stuttered, faltered, then returned, slightly different. Not enough. She needed that equipment dead. She cycled the bolt, shifted to the right figure. Hands on a control panel, headset on, eyes wide now, searching the ridge lines he couldn't see through with his naked eye. Crack! The headset flew sideways, attached to half his skull. The third operator broke, scrambling out from under the net, sprinting for cover. She put a round into the equipment case instead. It burst into a brief spray of plastic and metal. Lights went out. In her ear, the grinding roar of the jammer dropped an octave, then several more, then broke into static. Thunder 6, this is Overwatch. Say again, grid. Over. A startled, disbelieving laugh answered. We've got you, Overwatch. Jammer just took a hit, grid to follow. Still chopped, but intelligible enough. A crack in the wall. Back on the ridges, the enemy reacted like an animal stung in an unexpected place. Tracer fire clawed toward her position, speculative at first, then more focused. They couldn't see her, not yet, but they could triangulate. Any ridge she could see them from was one they could shoot at. Kara flattened closer to the rock, letting a few rounds whistle overhead. Chips of stone stung her face. A buzzing whine cut through the gunfire, high-pitched, insistent. She saw the drone launch from a pad near the jammer's former position, its rotors spinning bright halos in the glare. It climbed, nose tilting as its sensors scanned, then started moving along the ridgelines, searching for any heat signature that wasn't supposed to be there. If they found her, they'd walk mortar fire right onto this ledge. There'd be nowhere to go. She tracked the drone with her naked eye first, then brought the scope up, following its arc. Hunting the hunter meant hunting its tether. The quadcopter drifted over a rock outcrop, hovered, then moved back toward a pair of kneeling figures, one holding a controller, the other watching a tablet screen. 1,200 meters. Wind heavier up there, judging by the drift of their breath. She didn't have many rounds to spare, but leaving an enemy eye in the sky was worse than burning ammo now. She aimed not at the drone, but at the thin neck of rock shielding the operators. The bullet would do enough damage to the stone that the fragments would do the rest. She settled, exhaled, fired. The round hit the rock with a flat thud. A jagged chunk broke off and slammed into the drone operators. One went down immediately, the other staggered, dropping the controller. The quadcopter, suddenly blind, did what machines do without input. It tried to stabilize. Without guidance in the gusting wind, it tipped, spun, and then spiraled into the slope. It hit hard, pieces flying. In the valley, Rios heard the net clear enough to shout coordinates. Air and artillery elements on the far side of the mountain finally got a bead on the mess. Kara's magazine felt lighter. She did a quick count. One partially spent, two full, one almost empty. Not enough for a drawn-out duel. Enough, maybe, to pull a few more teeth. She shifted again, looking for the mortar spotter. She knew the pattern. The one not firing, the one talking, the one glassing. She found him near a small rock cairn. He moved with the urgency of someone who understood that time was running out, his hand pressed to an earpiece, binoculars up, calling corrections to tubes she couldn't see. Without him, the mortars would be just blindly throwing steel. She took it with a single shot. The binoculars flew out of his hands. Then he toppled backward, limbs loose. Almost immediately, the mortar pattern fell apart. Shells started landing wide, high on the slopes or short in empty snowfields. Down below, the pressure lessened. The plateau of noise shifted. Soldiers raised their heads further, moved more boldly, shifted from pure survival to counterattack. Push on the left, Rios yelled, seizing the moment. Delta, bound up that wall. Echo, cover them. One squad began moving and bounding overwatch along the inner valley wall, using the irregularities in the snow and rock to creep closer to some of the lower enemy positions. Another squad poured fire overhead, making the ambushers duck. On the enemy side, someone with authority realized this unseen shooter on the ridge was doing more damage than any single rifle should. Down near a cluster of rocks where a distinctive armored figure had been visible occasionally. A thicker vest, better helmet, calm body language amid the chaos. Kara saw hands chopping through the air, pointing toward her general direction. Moments later, a small team of enemy soldiers began climbing toward her ledge, ropes and axes flashing. They were good. They moved quickly, efficiently, using the terrain's folds, not wasting energy. They weren't just fighters. They were mountain people. Her time was shrinking. She forced herself not to look at them for more than a second. They were a problem, but not yet the problem. She swept the battlefield again. That was when she saw the equipment crate. It sat half-dragged out of a specialized vehicle near the front of the convoy. A hardened case with reinforced corners and multiple locks. Two enemy fighters had seized it when the ambush started and had been trying to haul it up slope ever since. Now, with the fight turning, they were making one last desperate push. The armored figure, their commander, judging by how others deferred to him, was running toward them, one hand on a detonator clutched to his chest, the other waving a cameraman forward. Of course, if they couldn't steal the drives, they'd destroy them and film it, with as much coalition wreckage in the frame as possible. From this ledge, Kara could see the entire geometry of the scene. The commander, the crate, the camera, the climbing team coming for her, the squads below fighting for every meter. She checked her magazine. 3 rounds. 3 decisions. She could try to stop the climbers, buy herself more time. But if she did and missed, or only wounded, the commander would reach the crate and the detonator, and everything this mission was supposed to protect would vanish in a flash. Some losses you could rebuild from. Some you couldn't. She shifted the crosshairs to the commander. Wind had shifted subtly, dragging her breath's vapor a few degrees more toward the east. She adjusted her hold, imagining the bullet's arcing path through the frigid air. He was closer than the jammer had been, but moving, crouched, using what little cover there was. He reached the crate, slapped a hand against it, and yelled something to the camera that she couldn't hear but could guess at. She exhaled until there was nothing left in her lungs. His hand moved toward the detonator. She pressed the trigger. The rifle kicked into her shoulder. The sound rolled across the valley. Through the scope, she saw the round hit center mass. The commander's chest jerked in, then out, blood darkening his winter gear. His hands spasmed, the detonator flying from his grip into the snow. He fell backward onto the crate he'd planned to martyr himself on, eyes wide in surprise. For a heartbeat, every fighter near him paused. Their leader wasn't supposed to die like that, from a direction no one had planned for, in the middle of his speech. The cameraman's lens swung wildly, then dropped. On the ridges, fire slackened as confusion rippled outward. Discipline broke just a little. Enough. In a valley, Rio saw the moment and took it. Push. Now, he shouted. Get to that crate, secure it. All guns cover. The bounding squad surged forward, crossing patches of ground that would have been suicide minutes earlier. They reached the specialized vehicle, shot the 2 remaining enemy fighters who'd been dragging the crate, and ringed it with bodies and guns. One trooper slapped his hand on the case's metal skin like it was a living thing. We've got the package, he yelled into the net. Above, the climber team, closing in on Kara, reached a hanging cornice of snow and ice. They were maybe 50 meters below her ledge now, close enough that she could hear their shouted words carried on the wind. She would not want a gunfight at that distance with 3 rounds and no cover. But the mountain could. She shifted the scope higher to a slab of ice overhanging the climber's route, fissures spiderwebbing through it from the constant freeze-thaw. She found the fracture line, the place where the weight of the whole sheet rested on a narrow column. 2 rounds left. She chose the seam, aimed, and fired. The bullet punched into the ice with a dull, cracking thud. For a second, nothing happened. Then the fracture line spread, multiplying, deepening. The hanging piece sagged, groaned, and then ripped free from the slope. The slab sheared off and slammed down onto the climber team, dragging a mass of snow with it. The small avalanche thundered into the gully they were in, swallowing them in white. It wasn't enough to bury the whole mountain, but it was enough to make the route impassable, at least for a while. Silence, for a moment, filled the space between gunshots. Then the distant thrum of helicopter rotors rolled up the valley, growing louder. Kara lay there, cheek against the stock, lungs burning, ears ringing, her last round still in the chamber. She let the rifle rest. Down below, the unit she was no longer officially part of was still alive. Battered, bleeding but alive. And they had the crate they'd gone for. One rifle in the right place at the right time had tilted the whole board. The price would come later. It always did. By the time Kara climbed down from the ledge, her legs were trembling with cold and exhaustion. The return route felt longer than the ascent, each step an argument between muscle and will. In the pass, the fight had burned itself down to embers. Smoke hugged the valley floor, thin and gray, curling around the wrecks. Air support had hit the remaining enemy positions once the jammer went dark and coordinates started flowing, driving survivors back into the deeper mountains. Medevac birds had come and gone, their rotors beating the air, carrying the worst of the wounded away. The silence that followed them felt heavy, full of things unsaid. As Kara walked into the outskirts of the makeshift command area, men and women glanced up, then did double takes. She looked like any other soldier who'd been too close to a blast, face smudged, gear scraped, eyes tired. The rifle slung over her shoulder made the difference. No one remembered signing it over to her. Rios met her halfway. His helmet was off, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat and soot. There was a bandage on his forearm, blood seeping through, but he was upright. "You picked a hell of a time to come back," he said. "You picked a hell of a pass," she replied. They stood there for a moment, looking at each other. Then he nodded once, simple and grateful. "We'll talk inside," he said. "Command wants to debrief while they've still got daylight." Inside a hastily thrown-up tent, a folding table had been turned into a war crime scene of paperwork, maps, and steaming mugs of something pretending to be coffee. Captain Sawyer stood at one end, sleeves rolled up, eyes darker than usual. The company commander, Major Lang, leaned on his knuckles at the other, listening to a quick status report from a radio operator. In the center of the table sat the encrypted crate, still scuffed from its attempted kidnapping, but intact. Next to it lay a stack of captured documents, handwritten notes, route sketches, a printed briefing sheet in the enemy's language. Sawyer picked up one of the pages as Kara entered, scanning it with a tight jaw. "They were after the package," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Take it if they could, destroy it if they couldn't. And they wanted footage either way." He set the page down, rubbed his eyes. "Sergeant Holt," Lang said, straightening up, "I have a feeling I owe you a thank you and a reprimand." Kara stood at attention, aware of every regulation she'd stepped over in the last few hours. "You disobeyed orders," Lang went on. "You left your assigned post. You checked out equipment without authorization. You engaged the enemy without being on the mission roster." "Yes, sir," she said. There was nothing else to say. Sawyer slid another document across the table, a sketch of the pass with firing positions marked, arrows showing intended kill zones, a note about capturing coalition equipment and personnel for broadcast. "Your pattern recognition," he said grudgingly. "Jawal, the way they used the valley then, it's almost copy-paste. They refined it, but you called it." Kara said nothing. The paper spoke loudly enough. Lang sighed. "By the letter of the law, what you did was wrong," he said. "By the reality outside that tent," he jerked his chin toward the pass, "we'd be writing letters home instead of reports if you hadn't done it." Rios leaned forward. "Sir, with respect, she did what we say we want our people to do. She saw something, she knew something, and when the system failed to listen, she acted." Sawyer looked down at the crate. "If they'd gotten those drives out of here, or even destroyed them on camera, we'd have a different kind of nightmare on our hands," he said. "Not to mention the body count." Lang studied Kara's face, searching for something beyond the blank professionalism she wore. "What drove you up that mountain, Sergeant?" he asked quietly. "You could have stayed here. Said you tried. Blamed the jammer like the rest of us." Kara's gaze drifted to the side table where her rifle now lay, the training stock looking oddly dignified after the work it had done. Next to it, tucked under a corner of the foam, was the photograph she'd brought with her, edges curled from being handled too often. She reached over, picked it up, and laid it flat on the table. "My brother died in mountains like these," she said. "Different country, same slopes. Command pushed us into a valley that looked safe on paper. We didn't have anyone on the high ground. When it went bad, there was nothing we could do but try not to join him." Lang's eyes flicked to the photograph, then back to her. "I told myself I wouldn't watch that happen again if I could help it," Kara continued. "Today, I could help it." The tent was quiet for a long beat. Sawyer picked up the photo, looked at it, then set it down carefully, as if it might break. "The incident that got you written up," he said. "That compound. There were kids in it," Kara said. "I saw them through the scope when the order came to fire. I called it in. They told me to shoot anyway. I didn't. We found them afterward in the cellar. Command called it an unfortunate miscommunication. They called my refusal insubordination." Lang's mouth tightened. "The paperwork that removed you from this mission was based on that," he said slowly. "On the idea that you'd put your judgment above the chain of command when it mattered." "Yes, sir," she said. "That's accurate." "And today?" he asked. "Today," she said, "the chain of command put its judgment above what the terrain and enemy were telling it. I put my rifle where it needed to be to keep as many of us alive as possible. Same impulse. Different target. Silence again. Outside, Someone laughed too loudly, the brittle sound of adrenaline fading. Lang reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth patch, the unit insignia. The edges were frayed. It had clearly been taken off a uniform hastily. He sat on the table between them. Officially, he said, this will take time to untangle. There will be investigations, reports, probably some people covering their backsides. That's how it works. He pushed the patch a little closer to her. Unofficially, he said, no one out there, he nodded toward the pass, is going to forget who was on that ridge. You're one of us, whether the paperwork is caught up or not. And no one here, he added, giving Sawyer a brief, pointed look, is going to kick you out again without a fight. Kara looked at the patch. It was a small thing, cloth and thread, but it represented belonging in a way metals never did. She picked it up and folded her fingers around it. Later, when she stepped back out into the snow, the light had changed. The sun was lower, the sky streaked with high clouds. The wrecks in the pass were distant shadows. As she walked past the line of vehicles, soldiers glanced up. Some nodded. Some lifted a hand in a small salute, a fingertip brushing helmet brim. No speeches, no applause, just simple acknowledgement. Patterson, leg bandaged, leaning on crutches, caught her eye and gave her a crooked grin. Nice shooting, Sarge, he said. You know, for someone who wasn't even supposed to be there. She smiled, a small, tired thing. Don't tell anyone, she said. At the edge of the camp, she stopped and looked up at the ridgeline. From here, the ledge she'd lain on was invisible, swallowed by distance and angle. No tracks marked the route she'd taken. The wind had seen to that. It was as if she'd never been there at all. Below, in the valley, men and women moved among the wreckage, alive because she had been. In her mind, the narrator's voice, the one that had framed this whole day as a story bigger than any single report, spoke the line she didn't say out loud. They thought pushing her out would make the unit stronger. Turns out, the only reason it didn't fall apart was the one they left in the cold.